But even within ufology, you often find this self-censorship. And it's only when you talk to the actual experiencers, people like Whitley Strieber, that you realize how truly bizarre and abstract the phenomenon can be. Because you have, just as I talked about playing the strongest suit in government UAP work, you even find it with the UFO researchers. And it's like, yeah, I have a case. It's the little grays on a table. Some of the cases that I got were not like that.
Can you go into them? Yeah, that would be great.
Well, one to answer your question about that left an impression on me was, it wasn't really an abduction, but it was an encounter with, I guess, beings. A particular woman who I got to know quite well had this experience that a whole bunch of apparently, normal-looking people all walked into an art shop in central London, started looking at all the produce, were there for like a long time, and she just felt there was something weird about these people. And then after a long time, they made a big show of coming up and buying a single pencil, like it was like a big thing. And then they handed over a very high denomination banknote. And when the woman went to give them their change, they looked confused, like they didn't understand the concept of getting their change bag. And she was so struck by this that she phoned somebody afterwards, and in fact during this whole thing, and said, there are aliens in my shop. And that's the kind of surreal nature of these encounters that sometimes doesn't even come out in the literature, because I think sometimes ufologists self-censor because they say, look, everyone knows what an alien looks like, everyone knows what an abduction is, it's a very structured thing, the beam, the table, the medical exam. When you get something like this that doesn't fit the model, ufologists self-censor and throw it out. But me being a kind of, I don't know, a sort of even-handed, like disinterested kind of observer of this, I take all the cases that I can get. And so that was one that really struck me.
So you said you got to know this woman quite well. Was that afterwards? Did she have any other encounters?
One that I would say was more of a time slip kind of phenomenon.
Missing time?
Seeing somebody that looked like herself from the future.
Whoa.
And it's again, I often find that the high strangeness of these cases is underreported.
Yeah.
I mean, some of it, I use the word surreal quite deliberately. The true phenomenon, I think, is much more surreal. I mean, we, of course, we can only look at all of this in a very anthropocentric way. If we are dealing with something truly alien, then it doesn't surprise me in a way that it is alien.
Yeah, good point. All of that, it's so interesting because obviously, like you said, we are sort of accustomed to hearing about the small grays, the tall grays, maybe the mantis folk, some reptilians here and there, even Nordic folk. But more rarely and probably possibly harder to detect are what seem to be these hybrids. In this case, of course, if you're aware of the work of David Jacobs, he's written books like The Threat, and the other one was like Among Us, or They're Among Us, really highlighted sort of these tales or these stories by abductees who were led to train a lot of these later stage hybrids that have been interacting with, human society, and train them in the most mundane ways, which I thought was really a fascinating read. And this strikes me as like one of those things, especially they would do this in groups. Yes. And for them to go out alone and not guided by an abductee or a human to help them, understand what is happening, is just really strange as well. But that type of behavior the monetary exchange with the large denomination, not knowing what to do with the change. These things all sound like what David Jacobs, what the witnesses in the books that David Jacobs wrote described, which is really fascinating. Had you ever encountered more of these sort of human-looking, quote-unquote, aliens?
Yes. Quite a few instances over the years, and it doesn't surprise me. I mean, again, if what we are dealing with here is extraterrestrial visitation, and I'm conscious that there are competing theories out there, time travelers from the future, something from other dimensions. But if we are dealing with something that is extraterrestrial, then absolutely this is going to be sort of multifaceted. And why would we think that any civilization with the technology to travel between the stars couldn't figure out a way of walking among us?
Yeah, it's unsettling to say the least. I mean, David Jacobs in those books, he'd also, hinted at the idea of like if there was some type of takeover, hypothetically, by these extraterrestrials, it wouldn't be so hostile. They'd be smart enough to sort of introduce themselves into our society without us knowing, and sort of that seems like a much more favorable way to take over the resources that we have here rather than destroy everything or enslave everyone. It's this like slow sort of integration into our society. And it points to a lot of these experiments done on board with these abductees, the genetic experiments and like what Whitley Strieber gone through and similar things to that. So, I mean, those things, potentially the fringe cases, I think fascinate me a lot more than hearing about these other type of aliens, although equally fascinating. Was there ever any witnesses that you encountered that had seen your typical alien?
Sure, yeah, I had cases like that, and people would talk about the so-called greys, but a lot of this was under hypnosis, and obviously there are some issues with that in terms of false memory syndrome and just kind of cultural contamination. The image of a grey is now so firmly embedded in people's minds that it's maybe sort of almost like a default go-to thing. It's like if somebody's abducted, oh yeah, it was the greys, and you wonder again. Like any civilization with that technology probably can appear to us however they like, or can make us see things that are not there, and it almost becomes, I'll use this analogy with you deliberately, but like the magician's trick. You're looking at the hand that the magician is saying, but what you should really be looking at is what the other hand is doing.
Masters of subterfuge are these entities potentially, and that's interesting because we as humans also deal in subterfuge towards our own kind, especially in these government positions. There's often national security risks that we have to hide. There's often these cases that we can't let the public know about. Did you ever feel like during your time that there was actively information being suppressed at some level that you were denied access to?
It's difficult because you can't prove a negative. I actually felt that I had access to everything I needed. Certainly in the UK, I didn't feel that there was, I don't know, another organization in the shadows, because they would have needed access to the data. And also, I had both the security clearance and the need to know. When, for example, the Secretary of State for Defense answered questions in Parliament about this, I was the person that would have to draft the replies. So as the subject matter expert, I believe that I had total access. Of course, you can never say never. What I felt that was an issue was the United States, because even myself doing that job in government, I could not get access to what the US knew and was doing about this. And I was told, frankly, the same as everyone else was told. No, there's no program. Nobody's doing anything. We haven't done anything since Blue Book was shut down at the end of 1969. Now we know that that's obviously was not true. And clearly you wouldn't, you have ATIP and ORSAT before that. Obviously there were other things. You wouldn't have a gap where this wasn't being done. So I felt that if anything was being hidden from me, it was what the United States was up to. It's the one area where the so-called special relationship didn't really work.
And there was never a time where you thought that perhaps there was some other foreign government sort of impeding or involving themselves in your work?
No, we knew through intelligence sources that Russia and China had a program, had separate programs looking at this. But we didn't really know the details of that. And we didn't feel that there was any active interference from them in our program.
Had you heard of any crash retrievals done in the UK?
Some rumors, but nothing you could hang your hat on. And I was not convinced by any of those cases. We had a case from the early 1970s where something was alleged to have crashed in Wales on Berwyn Mountain. There was another rumor about a crash in the Peak District in the north of England. But I looked at that, and of course I had access to all the historical files on all this. Nothing convinced me that there had been any UK crashes.
I see. Very interesting. Thank you so much for answering those questions.